crash test tariffs, Trump targets, foreign cars, and breaks the industry mold, part 5 of 7 in a series on Liberation Day. Trump didn't just issue tariffs, he blew a hole through the global auto industry. 25% on all foreign-made vehicles. Midnight enforcement, no exceptions. But that raises the question, what counts as foreign? And who really pays the price when the assembly line crosses a border? At midnight on April 3rd, the global auto industry got blindsided. Without a vote, without a transition period, without so much as a whisper of compromise, President Trump's 25% tariff on foreign-made cars and trucks kicked in. It was real, it was fast, and it was brutal. There were no carve-outs for countries, no exemptions by name, no grace period for finished vehicles. As outlined in Article 2, Congress had already taken a backseat to Trump's executive momentum. They weren't at the Rose Garden announcement, and they certainly weren't consulted before one of the largest industrial sectors in the world was hit with a trade shock, because they no longer had the authority to stop it. Congress handed that power away years ago through laws like Section 301 and Section 232, and now they just issue press releases while the executive branch writes the rules. When it came time to impose a penalty that could shake supply chains and change buying behavior overnight, Trump didn't need to negotiate. He signed, it was done, and suddenly every automaker in the world had a problem. The 25% tariff wasn't just about where a car is assembled, it was about where it was made. That distinction, simple on paper, impossible in practice, threw the entire industry into confusion. Under the new rules, any vehicle that didn't meet specific rules of origin thresholds for domestic content was subject to the full tariff. That meant even cars assembled in American factories were now in the crosshairs if key components came from abroad. A Honda CR-V built in Ohio using Japanese drivetrains, taxed. A Subaru Outback assembled in Indiana with imported suspensions, taxed. Even a Volkswagen Atlas made in Tennessee could trigger the penalty if enough of its electronics or structural parts were foreign. Dealerships and supply managers scrambled to figure out which vehicles were now overpriced overnight. Some importers halted shipments, others took losses. Everyone tried to guess what counted as American enough under a rule book that was clear in language but messy in consequence. And that's before you get to the parts delay. While the tariff on cars took effect immediately, duties on engines, transmissions, and key components were delayed by 1 month with enforcement set for May 3rd. That 1-month gap kicked off a silent stampede. Ports surged with last-minute shipments. Importers scrambled to flood inventories before the door slammed shut. Technically legal, strategically revealing. And then came the panic from across the border. Canada and Mexico, nominally protected under USMCA, were hit with uncertainty. Trump's team had suggested vehicles qualifying under the trade pact might be spared or at least taxed less, but no one defined what that meant. Was it final assembly in Mexico? Or did it require sourcing North American steel and electronics? Did meeting the minimum regional value content guarantee exemption or only delay the penalty? In reality, USMCA-compliant vehicles got partial exemptions. Only the foreign content was taxed. If a vehicle from Mexico had 45% U.S. content, the tariff only applied to the remaining 55%, but none of that nuance was spelled out clearly. Manufacturers were left in limbo. Some North American-built vehicles were assumed to be safe, others weren't. The message from the White House was loud, but not specific. And in an industry that runs on precision and predictability, that confusion was a cost all its own. The average American car buyer may not follow geopolitics, but they noticed what happened next. A 25% tariff doesn't just show up on the window sticker, it compounds. It applies to the import value, not the retail price, and then gets passed along through every level of markup and distribution. A $30,000 foreign-made vehicle can easily become a $38,000 decision. Dealers tried to absorb the blow or offer discounts, but the math didn't lie. Some buyers delayed purchases. Others switched to used. And a lot of families started looking twice at vehicles stamped with a USVIN plate. The price shift wasn't theoretical, it was personal. The tariff hit middle-class wallets by breakfast. Foreign automakers didn't see it coming. Executives at Toyota, Hyundai, and Volkswagen were reportedly stunned. Share prices dipped in foreign exchanges the morning after. Spokespeople issued carefully worded threats about moving factories, cutting exports, and lobbying allies. Hyundai warned its U.S. dealers that current pricing could not be guaranteed on vehicles wholesaled after April 2nd. Volkswagen paused rail shipments from its Mexico plant and held back inventory at ports. Toyota told its partners it would maintain operations but begin reassessing costs. It was clear nobody was ready. And behind the scenes, companies began planning their response, and it wasn't flight, it was investment. Trump had made the choice clear. Build it here or pay for access. No more outsourcing final assembly, slapping on a U.S. logo, and calling it patriotic. The tariff was a wall. Either climb over it with domestic jobs or stand outside and complain. Some grumbled, some adapted, others hesitated and watched their market share begin to shift. Domestic response wasn't simple either. The United Auto Workers loudly backed the move. Real jobs were on the line. UAW President Shawn Fain called it a long overdue reset and said the tariffs could bring thousands of jobs back to American plants. For organized labor, this was a win. But the big three automakers were more cautious. They liked the pressure on foreign competitors, but feared retaliation on their own exports. Their trade group issued a safe, non-committal statement. Behind closed doors, they were scrambling. Smaller manufacturers, especially parts suppliers, tangled in global sourcing webs, were suddenly exposed. Not everyone who supported American industry had the flexibility to shift production on a dime. The political split was immediate. It wasn't left versus right. It was global versus local. And that divide cut straight through both parties. Trump didn't hedge his message. He didn't offer escape clauses. His stance was simple. If you want to sell your cars here, build your cars here. He wasn't punishing automakers. He was sorting them. He used the tariff like a gate. It was a loyalty test for corporations. Are you committed to American labor, or are you just here for the consumers? There was no middle ground, no compromise, just a binary invest or pay. And still, Congress stayed silent. As we detailed in Article 2, the GOP leadership didn't even bother showing up to the rollout. Now they whined about price shocks while doing absolutely nothing to reassert authority. They ceded tariff power to the executive decades ago. And instead of reclaiming it, they pivoted to fundraising emails and half-hearted hearings. They want to vote by proxy, get quoted on TV, and pretend they're governing until the real governing happens without them. Trump didn't break the process. He simply used the tools Congress gave him. And now, a single executive order just rewrote the rules of a trillion-dollar industry in under 24 hours. And here's the part nobody's talking about. Within 10 days of the tariff announcement, at least 4 major automakers began expanding U.S. production. One restarted a mothballed plant in Michigan. Another pushed forward hiring plans for a long-delayed EV line in Texas. A third began scouting land for a parts facility in Alabama. These weren't press events. They weren't coordinated. They were strategic pivots, quietly executed, quietly confirmed. Trump didn't just set a rule, he flipped the board, and companies didn't wait to be told twice. Next up in the series, we move from mechanics to message. In Article 6, we'll break down the real ideological stakes behind Liberation Day, why tariffs weren't just economic policy, but a national identity referendum.